he's sharp, or like he seems sensible enough. Yeah. Unless I know them already. Yeah. There were more, but I don't know if they were like filling in. There were two other women. I was so quite surprised. Okay. So, and I get a lot of complaints. Part of it is
Okay.
it could be one. I do think that they have a lot of turnover for employees. Two, they do have breakdowns. I think with lawnmowers and stuff because they're only now getting new stuff. But oh,
Okay.
I had listened into the Brownsville BBC committee meeting. They're like, bunch of ladies who are retired or but like Noel said, sometimes we have a lot of needs, like real needs. I was like, one of the things that really bothered me, and Rose is with me. Remember how they allocated $15,000 for Christmas lights? Only districts 3 and 4 got it. One of them went over the budget, and they put them up after Christmas and before New Year's come up. So I get requests for shade structures for. I mean, I don't know how much a shade structure, but $15,000 could probably go towards. So I'm wondering if we like. I mean, I'll start being more vocal at these BBC meetings and all that stuff. Like, top of that is because she's also.
We ready?
Yes, Mayor, we're ready.
Okay, let's go.
It is now 5:02 p.m. Pursuant to Chapter 551, Title 5 of the Texas Government Code, the Texas Open Meetings Act, notice was given that the City Commission of the City of Brownsville, Texas, in accordance with Article 5, Section 12 of the Charter of said city, would convene a special meeting on Wednesday, March 30th, 2022 at 5 p.m. in the City Commission chambers located on the second floor of the Brownsville City Hall Old Federal Building located at 1001 East Elizabeth Street, Brownsville, Texas. Pursuant to Section 551.127 Texas Government Code, one or more commissioners or employees may attend this meeting remotely using video conferencing technology. The video and audio feed of the video conferencing equipment can be viewed and heard by the public at the address posted above as the location of the meeting. Members of the public, employees, and the City Commission may join via the WebEx teleconference meeting link provided at the City of Brownsville Agenda Center. This notice and meeting agenda are posted online at the City of Brownsville Agenda Center, and members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting hosted through WebEx can also join at the phone numbers provided on the agenda. Members of the public who submitted a public comment form will be permitted to offer public comments as provided by the agenda and as permitted by the presiding officer during the meeting. A recording of the meeting will be made and will be available to the public in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. I'll now call the roll. I have Mayor Mendez present in person, Commissioner Cowan present in person, Commissioner Gowan present in person, Commissioner Galonsky present in person, Commissioner De Los Santos present in person, and Commissioner Cardenas present in person. Do we have Commissioner Tetreault virtually?
She did indicate to me that she was on her way. That was a few minutes ago.
Okay.
She'll be here in person.
Okay, Mayor, so it's 5:04 and you may call the meeting to order. We have a quorum.
Welcome, everybody. I'll call the meeting to order officially. Thank you.
Our next item is invocation.
Let's all stand for the prayer and remain standing for the pledge. Father God, we thank you once again for the many blessings we have in the city of Brownsville. When we see the news about what's happening around the world, it should remind us how blessed we are. And for those places that are not experiencing the safety and security and blessings that we have here, Lord, we ask you to cause them to cry out to you, and we know that you will answer them. We specifically continue to lift up Ukraine to you and other places that are suffering. And Lord God, for this meeting tonight, we ask you to lead and guide our mayor, Trey Mendez, and each commissioner, and everyone that is presenting anything for the very best for the city of Brownsville. You know you know the ins and outs of everything that they are looking at tonight. Give them clarity and divine wisdom in each decision. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And now a short moment of silence where we can all add our prayers to what has already been spoken. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Our next item is our public comment period, and our first public comment form was received from Jose Torres. Mr. Torres resides at 433 Gilson Road in Brownsville. Mr. Torres, are you present? Okay, and our next form was received from Mr. Francisco Arriaga, and he resides at 4200 Jaime Zapata, Suite 117 in Brownsville.
Mr. Arriaga here? Yes, sir. Go ahead. Come on up. Step up to the podium, sir. Just tell us your name and you'll have 3 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Francisco Arriaga. I am a citizen and resident of Brownsville and a real estate developer. And the purpose for my presence today is to bring your attention to a great concern regarding the sidewalk and trails master plan, which will create, in my view, a liability to the city and nuisance and personal anguish and complication to property owners who have recycle frontage. And particularly my concern is the wrongful intention of this plan to take away private property from citizens for the purpose of building jogging trails without any compensation or due process. As a citizen of Brownsville, I want to point out that the damages created by this plan for property owners who have a resaca are: one, it removes the privacy of the backyard for people who own resaca properties. With this plan, anyone can wander around your backyard and reduces your security of your home and of your backyard. This drastically reduces the value of the property since it no longer has resaca frontage. Resaca frontage is what makes a property more valuable, as everyone knows. It reduces the building area on which to build a home. It reduces the ability to build larger homes. And it creates the propensity for more theft. Breaking into homes will be a lot easier since the jogging trail will be an easy getaway access. Resacas are a cherished part of our community. They belong to the property owners. That's what the warranty deed and the survey says. You know, when I think of a resaca, I picture myself when I'm in my 80s, sitting near the resaca on my chair, looking at that peaceful water as I enjoy my golden years. That's what I worked for all my life. With that peace of mind, that moment that brings me joy and tranquility. Not a bunch of people running around making noise on my backyard and dogs doing their bodily needs right on near to my backyard. Think about it. Now, as a Brownsville developer that I've invested a lot of years, for 30 years in this city, the damages caused by this request of the mobility department to take away 20 feet by the length of the resaca are the
Mr. Guerra, can we
following.
go ahead and wrap it up? Your time's up.
Okay, the plat of my subdivision was presented in planning and zoning since last year, and it has been approved. And I have been working with this for months. My subdivision was approved this year, and planning and zoning, at the very last minute, the mobility department notifies planning and zoning that I have to donate all the frontages of my resaca, 20 feet by 1,000 feet long, because we might build a jogging trail in the future.
All right, sir, I'm sorry. Can you follow up or have somebody follow up with us? The time's up. Thank you.
Our next item is work sessions. Item 1, Downtown Streetlight Project Update, Engineering and Public Works Department.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Doro Garcia with the City Engineer, and I'll be giving a quick update on the downtown streetlights. I'll give a little bit of recap of, for those who may not be familiar with this project, we're replacing 167 light poles in the downtown area. This project was funded through the Must Foundation, and the project itself consists of replacing the lights that were no longer in, some of them were in very poor condition, and others were reaching their useful life. We began that project a couple of months ago, and since then, our contractor has, with the assistance of Brownsville Public Utilities Board, have removed 73 light poles, and they have tested these bases and given us recommendations for repairs that are needed. We have completed the repairs to the anchor bolts that were needed, and the installation of some of these poles has already taken place. We have some concerns that we're dealing with right now. As you all may or may not know, some of these lights have been hit by delivery vehicles and are a little bit lower than we anticipated having issues with. So we've gone back to the vendor of the poles to see what options we have so that we can raise these poles so that we avoid having these delivery trucks hit these. The lights themselves have a small skirt here. I'll show you what they look like on the next picture. On the far right-hand side, you can see the picture of the light bases that we currently replaced. With the new bases, you can see that one's actually damaged. What we're looking at is getting an extension that will raise these fixtures about 3 feet, hopefully keep them from getting hit in the future. They will be sending us some samples so that we can try out and confirm that they will work with what we're trying to do. In order to achieve this, or once we decide whether we're going to be going with this type of arm, we're looking at about a 6 to 8 week lead time before they can begin production of this arm. And we're estimating about 3 to 4 months for the entire delivery of the 167 bases if we do choose to go with this option. As you can see on this slide here, you can see the option on the left is what the light fixture would look like. In this particular picture or image, it does not have the skirting around the light like we have selected. So that would be one of the differences on the new light fixture with the new height increase that we have on the arm. Once we have those, we'll go ahead and decide whether it's something that we will be able to proceed with. Here's some images of the repairs that we have done to the 73, or actually the 45 anchor rods that we replaced. You can see some of the rods that were damaged on the pictures on the left, and the ones on the right show the actual replacements that we've had for the anchor rods. During this process, obviously, we have not been able to illuminate these or energize these poles. And by not being able to energize these poles, we've ran into some lighting issues downtown, as you all are well aware of. What we have done is we have worked with PUB, and PUB has installed some additional lighting at the intersections to help cover some of the darker areas. For those areas that still do not have enough coverage, the city has set up some temporary lighting. We do have those cases mainly on Washington Street. One of the things that we are doing just because of the concerns that we've had in the recent events that we've had, is we are having a crew now go out there and make sure that these temporary lights are illuminated every day. And we've also increased security. Brownsville Police Department has been assisting us with having additional security to make sure, you know, they let us know if any of the lights do go out, to make sure that we do have them illuminated. At this time, I'll answer any questions that you all may have on this project.
Dodo, first, on that new extension that you're talking about, when we're saying 3 feet, is that where the base of the light is now to where it will be, or is that talking about that whole contraption?
It is from, if we're looking, oh, we can't see the laser pointer. It's right about where the skirt of the,
Go back to the other one, where it's just that one right
okay.
there.
So the top arm, as you can see, is pretty much just straight across that.
Right.
By 3 feet.
But my question is this, when we're saying that represents 3 feet, are we talking about where the bulb will be 3 feet higher? Are we talking about this arm overall is 3 feet high?
The bulb, 3 feet
The bulb will
higher.
be 3 feet
Yes.
higher. Thank you. Second, and Washington is a problem. The temporary lights that we've got out are insufficient right now.
Okay.
One, they're not on frequently enough, and this past weekend was a part of that problem. Staff did respond very quickly to get them on, but still they're 2 blocks apart. There's a lot of darkness in between. And to me, if we're gonna take out every street light on 2 blocks, we need more than 2 light towers at the end of those blocks. Whether
Definitely.
I don't know if it's an option to go to just taking out every other pole.
Right now, we're not removing any more poles because of the issues that we've had. We removed these poles, we did not anticipate having the issues we're having right now. So when we did the removal of what we knew we could replace. Unfortunately, we had more anchor bolt damages than we anticipated. We just completed those repairs. So right now, what's just keeping us from energizing or installing the remaining lights is deciding whether we go with the extension or we continue with what we have and illuminated. So in the future, for the remaining 73 or 74 poles that are left, those will probably be removed in a probably 3 block stretch so that we don't have this issue occur where we have blackout areas in
So
different
it'll be
blocks.
alternating poles.
Correct. Well, no, it'll be continuous blocks, but as we remove them, we'll be replacing them. We're not gonna be going 2 or 3 months waiting without any lights going back up.
Same day?
Probably not the same day, but probably within 2 to 3 days.
Okay, then we need a plan for interim lighting.
Yeah, we'll
Because
have
we have businesses that are out there, and just like this weekend, I see an event that has light towers, temporary light towers on top of working street lights. And then on a block where we've got several businesses, no street lights, and light towers not in operation.
The
We
idea
can't
is-
have that again.
The idea is that we'll have 2 to 3 blocks without lights, and they'll have the light towers in place only. And with, like I said, at most, it would be, maximum 5 days that those light towers would be in place. For these current situation that we have, we're probably looking at about another month or 2 months, so we'll definitely get more light towers out there.
Do
What I-
we have more
one-
lights?
What I'd like to see is the plan for how far apart those towers are gonna be spaced out.
Okay.
Thank you, sorry.
And do we have more lights?
We have some, I believe we have 4 that the city has, and the remainder we can always rent.
And I also heard, correct me here, that the cabling, you're changing the cabling, is that being done right now, or is that not
Some of
accurate?
it, the ones that's damaged is being changed as we're going. Right now that I know of, there's no cabling that's being replaced. The only reason we don't want to energize it is because it'll energize a circuit, basically the complete block or 6 to 8 light fixtures. And we have bases that don't have anything except for wires, so the last thing we want is somebody to touch a wire they're not supposed to, or be messing with a wire they're not supposed to be messing with. We just don't want to even deal with that
So once this
situation.
decision is made, how far are we? Are we 3 months away still?
I would say roughly between 2 to 4 months, yeah.
Yeah, so
Production, once we give them the green light, production will not start, or we won't get our first shipment until about 6 to 8 weeks.
And is this something that's going to be brought to us, or is this something that you all are taking care
Well,
of?
more than likely, it would be brought back to the commission for approval.
Because you don't have a cost estimate yet, do you? And when you're talking about the shipment, you're talking about the extension arm?
The extension arm, correct.
And so the reason that there's several blocks that are out, is it because they're all on the same grid? Or how does that, can you
Because
explain
we
that to
don't-
us?
Unfortunately, when we did the initial study, we only had about 10 to 15% of the bases that were damaged. Once we started removing and getting the testing of half of the poles, we ended up with more than half of what we removed was damaged. So it was a drastic increase to what we had originally planned for. And, unfortunately, the repairs were all done in-house. It was not very costly, but, they did have to get repaired. So that was one setback that we had. And then the second setback that we're having now is, do we go in and install the lights right now? And then go back and remove them and reinstall them once we get the new extension. So we'll make that decision once we know exactly how long it's gonna take. And we can only energize the circuit. Some of them are by blocks, some of them are like block and a half. So we have to have every single light post in that block installed before we can turn them on.
I think it's pretty clear. Either you put them back in and turn them on, or you have temporary lights. That's the only real choice.
One or the other.
And we know that it's going to take a couple months. So I think you're probably going to have to pick pretty quick, because it's been an issue for weeks where there's several blocks and often more than one street downtown that's out. And it's a concern and it's causing issues. So that needs to be addressed as soon as possible.
Now,
think-
Dodo, on those things that are on there,
Yeah.
can you remove those?
Yes.
Would that be an option
That
to
is-
do?
That is an option that they presented. Obviously, the city's not looking into that because we do have the structure itself on hand, and we have all 174 of those.
No,
but it
I'm
is
not
an
saying
option.
long-term, I'm saying just for, we have to put some lights up.
Oh,
And-
no, in the interim, the decision that we're gonna be making in the next week is, once we get the extension, if we decide to go it looks like, just based on your comments right now, is that we will likely install the existing lights that we have, even though they may get damaged, so we can illuminate it, or we can just install them without the skirt, just to keep them in place for right now and have it illuminated properly, and then just go through the extra work of having to remove it and reinstall the extension once we do get them.
But the issue, Dodo, is if you remove the skirt, you're going to have the light exposed on its own, and the height is a problem. It's not the skirt. So vehicles then are going to hit the light. So I just don't see that being feasible. I think you're just going to have some sort of action plan for now. I don't think you can continue to install these new lights until you figure out the extension. Otherwise, in those blocks where maybe you've installed these, I don't know, I just think that installing these throughout is probably not the answer, because you're going to have that height issue. So I think temporary light, at the very least, we need lights out there as soon as possible.
We'll definitely increase the lighting that we have out there right now.
Now, Dodo, you could also put one of those orange cans underneath and, lose a parking spot every block and a half.
It would be about 6 spaces roughly per block at minimum, if we were to do that.
Because,
So
I get
don't-
calls
don't know if
every
we
day
wanna
about
do
the
that
lighting.
downtown.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
think the temporary option still takes up a space, but it's not as many, obviously, by using the light towers that we have. But we'll definitely explore our options and see what we can do to better illuminate these areas.
How do we feel that raising the bulbs 3 feet will affect the level of lighting we're seeing at street level? Because I expect it'll dissipate to a greater degree if it's raised 3 feet. Are we looking at increasing the wattage, or have we looked at what that would do to the lighting?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your
So
question.
if we're raising the bulb further away from the street, then how much light is hitting the street? It'll dissipate more before it gets down to that level. Have we looked at,
We'll definitely take a look at that.
please? And the other thing I'd suggest, not to engineering and public works, but to staff, increase police patrols in this areas until we've got lighting fully operational again.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 2, Brownsville Sidewalk and Trails Master Plan. Commissioners Cardenas and De Los Santos.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Our office has been working with multimodal and planning departments on this item. This item was requested by the commissioners related to the proposed development along Dakota and Dockberry. It's along the southmost Las Palmas Wildlife Area. I will say that I had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Arriaga's attorney just before the meeting, and we'll be sharing the information that we have as a legal team with his legal counsel. We've tried to be upfront with our developers and the attorneys we work with, so we'll continue that. Although we'll reference Mr. Arriaga's property, we're only going to address it in general terms since his proposed plat is still being submitted and getting finalized. And for the purposes of this work session, we're going to use the property itself as a reference, but not go into the discussions of any proposals or any recommendations for that specific property. Under the UDC, there's actually a provision that I'll cover further that provides Mr. Arriaga an appeal process should he continue to want to contest this 20-foot easement that's being required out of the master plan. There are several ways to address the approach to this discussion. However, in order to respect everybody's time and adequately address these and other issues, myself along with Rick, Martin from Planning, Joel, and Frank from Multimodal, and a few other staff members, we've kind of drafted this preliminary roadmap. There's a roadmap. We can vary from it to take questions as they come. So the roadmap, we're going to briefly discuss the how and why we got to this point, the adoption of the sidewalk and master trails master plan. Similarly, we'll do the same with adoption of the UDC. Then we'll briefly discuss the enforcement mechanism for sidewalk and the trails master plan. Briefly talk about examples of other cities that do similar things as to Brownsville. And then the application of the master plan along the Resaca is similar to Mr. Arriaga's. I will say that the requirement for the easement is not triggered by it being a fronting lot to the Resacas. It's just part of the entire plan. So it just so happens that this portion of the proposed trail abuts to this property, which abuts to Resaca. And then finally, probably the thing that most people want to know is, and then finally, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Better? And finally, a discussion about whether the master plan is compliant with state and federal law. I think that'll resolve a lot of questions that might be out there. And then again, a discussion, a quick discussion on the administrative remedy available to the developer under the UDC in case they feel that this requirement is overly burdensome on their property. And then hopefully we'll end that with some discussions and guidance from City Commission. So how and why we got here, the sidewalk and master trail plan, that was covered to accommodate and expand the mobility and connectivity for residents in Brownsville. It was adopted in 2013, and part of that included plans that covered trails, sidewalks, multi-use paths, and bike lanes, again, to increase the mobility for residents. And in some cases, that is required more so than other locations across the city. But in 2013, there was a requirement of a 20-foot corridor width for trail and shared youth paths, and that breaks down to 10 feet for the path and 5 feet on each side for access. And that was, we pulled that language directly from the resolution and enforcing documents that approved it. That requirement is still applicable now, even considering the revised plan in 2021. The other document that we'll talk about is the UDC. And so how and why we got here. Previous subdivision ordinances had several gaps, and they had a lengthy process to finally get approved for subdivision request. The city adopted the UDC to create a more cohesive and accessible document that incorporated all parts of the subdivision process to speed along and make sure that subdivision plats were approved in an efficient manner. And that allowed the Planning and Redevelopment Department to provide faster and better customer service. So we talk about that because that is actually the enforcement mechanism to the Sidewalk and Trails Master Plan under section 5.2.7 specifically deals with trails as it applies to the subdivision process. What I want to make clear is that it's for the subdivision process. So you have a developer that has raw land and they want to come and re-subdivide their 20, 40 acres. They're going to have to comply with all the plans and all the requirements required of subdivisions. And one of those is that sufficient land shall be dedicated to conform with the city's master plan. And this is reference to the Sidewalk and Trails Master Plan. Specific to the Resakas, there's also an additional provision in there that I've listed where PUB has an easement for maintenance and dredging the right-of-way for those lots fronting along the Resakas. And so in this case, and in other cases where the master plan has proposed a trail or a sidewalk that abuts the Resaka, they're both going to have UDC section 527 and 3.3G6. So I want to kind of show a couple of images and just to share that what the city of Brownsville is doing is not unique. It has been vetted. And so you see, the further north you go up in Texas, you start seeing larger bodies of water.
Hang on, Counselor. Somebody needs to click approve on there. That way that box goes away.
Or decline.
Or decline. But I think if you decline it, the whole presentation goes away.
I almost broke my touch screen thinking that it was a touch screen, but it's not. Trying to clear it off.
Well, I'll just continue saying, the next two slides are just examples that other cities have vetted similar processes in requiring, these are called exactions. So anytime you have a new development, cities are allowed to require of these developments exactions to help plan for the future growth of the city, whether that be roadway, parks, trails, and these have all been vetted through the legal system. And so it is a common practice, and other cities have implemented similar master plans. This slide is actually to provide a comparison of what other cities do. And some master plans are actually a bit more burdensome on the developers. City of Louisville, actually, in addition to the parkland dedication, actually requires developers to actually construct the hike and bike trails. I think that box is still up there, but the City of Austin requires a right-of-way reservation or easement by instrument. City of Kyle requires actually fee simple or easement by instrument. And the City of Brownsville merely just asks, in this case, asked for a 20-foot easement by instrument for the allocation of that trail along the way. So the next couple of slides is actually, how is the master plan, how does it look when it's implemented? And true that this is relating to Mr. Arriaga's property, but it could very well be some other property. But the purpose of this slide is to show that the network that was intended when the city adopted its master plan, it was truly to connect and mobilize residents to be able to commute in between different parts of the city. And so you see that the left image shows the complete network of the plan. And over here to the right, you see the actual aerial footage of that, and we'll zoom in a little bit more into that.
Sorry, what's on the right side? I couldn't hear you. I think you speak and
So
you
it's
go
not
away from the
covering it.
mic, so
Okay.
I'm not catching part of what you're saying.
So, is that better? Or let's speak into it. So the right side is actually the aerial view of that portion that's been circled in red, and we'll zoom into it a little bit more. Let me click to the next. Can somebody click to the next slide, please? While we wait for them to click to the next slide. Okay, there it goes. So in this case, we're going to start talking about proportionality, rough proportionality as required as a legal standard. But I wanted the city commission to see the whole track, right? The whole connectivity to this trail. And what this, the one development here to the right, which is abuts Dakota, that's about 0.3 miles. Then it goes on to the adjacent property, then to the city of Brownsville owns the property to the left of that, and then you have the wildlife area to the left of that. Altogether, I believe staff's represented is about 1.3 miles. But that actually connects Dakota to the adjacent streets, as we previously saw, to the whole network of trails and sidewalks. Here to the right, you actually see what that 20 feet of easement looks like along the Resaca. I just wanted you to kind of get a visual of that. Because what it comes down to is what is required to be compliant with state and federal laws for exactions. And I really want to make that clear that this is an exaction along with the impact fee that comes along when you develop raw land into a bigger subdivision, right? So those are authorized by law and they're not takings. But to be valid, an exaction must satisfy the two big tests, the Nolan and Dolan test. The first one is actually probably the easier one to meet is to show the nexus, the connection between the requirement of the easement to the purpose of those restrictions, right? So here we would show that it supports the connectivity and mobility of residents among the city. But then the second portion of that goes to the Dolan test, which is the rough proportionality. Is it roughly proportional to the government's interest? Is the 20 feet roughly proportional to the government's interest in having this connectivity? And the reason why I bring that up, and the reason why I can share with this body that it can feel comfortable knowing that the actual plan, the UDC, the way this is applied across the board to all properties, it complies with state and federal laws. The reason why I can actually say that with such confidence is because the UDC actually provides a remedy based on proportionality. So in this case, and in other cases, if the developer said, hey, this exaction is taking up all of my property, they would be able to provide that argument through our proportionality appeal process within the UDC under 352. Now that has a certain process. There's certain documents that the developer would have to provide to the city engineer. The city engineer would approve or deny that request. But still, that would still be able to be appealed to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which has final decision-making authority. So I wanted to kind of provide that as a foundation to our discussion as we would consider all the aspects of how this master plan plays out and impacting individual developments that are coming up before the city. So with that, I'll take questions from the commission.
First, since P&Z has authority in this area, what type of a body is P&Z? It's not quasi-judicial, correct?
Nope, it's not quasi-judicial because we think of quasi-judicial as a zoning board of adjustments, but within Chapter 211, 212, this governing body can delegate authority to planning and zoning to make those types of decisions.
Well, my concern is that with the quasi-judicial body, certain standards have to be adhered to, such as no ex parte communications. There's a higher ethical standard. P and Z doesn't have to abide by those, do they, when they make decisions like this?
No, not necessarily, unless it's provided within our own code of ordinances or ethics codes.
And when we're talking about proportionality, and I understand with other areas where we might require easements, I look at it differently when we're talking about being able to provide utilities, for example, because that's affecting everybody else in that area. As where trails, I look at as more of a quality of life issue, not a necessity that everybody else has. And while I'm a big supporter of the trails, I do question, one, the impact this has on the value of property, because people do expect to be able to have that privacy when they're buying waterfront, and that would no longer be the case. And I would expect this developer may have had anticipated that when they paid whatever they paid for this property. I think I lost my second train of thought. I'll come back, yeah, I'll come back to mine. I forgot my second point.
So first of all, it has been proven over and over in cities across this country and across the world that trails increase property value, not decrease it. It has also been proven that trails increase safety because of more eyes on the street. It's not a laughing matter. That is proof, and I can provide you that proof, as can our multimodal department. The only reason that this particular frontage is involved is not because it's Resaca, but because that's where the trail goes. And in Southmost, there are very few sidewalks. There is very little walkability and bikeability. And so it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to retrofit the neighborhoods unless we use trails like this. That trail route was designed by a young woman who grew up in Southmost and who rode her bike or walked to UTV because she didn't have a car. She lived with her grandmother, who wanted to be able to walk and didn't want to have to rely on a car to take her to the nearest park or so forth to be able to walk. So some say it's a quality of life issue. I say it's and many others, not just me, say it's a infrastructure need that as I get older, I should be able to age in place, which means I should not have to have a car to get out of my property. I should be able to propel myself either walking or with my walker, or in my wheelchair with my provider, or on my bicycle to get wherever I want to go as much as possible. And Brownsville, as an age-friendly community, should be supportive of that desire. We don't really have to look across the country to see examples of what I'm saying. You can look as close as Paseo de la Resaca, a neighborhood in Brownsville for years that intentionally built trails and preserved the Resaca frontage to intentionally provide that infrastructure. It is thriving. It is a desirable place to live. It is a safe place. I sit on the board, and so I hear crime reports and all of that kind of stuff every single month, and they are among the lowest in the city. So and those property values are higher because of the intentional infrastructure that they built. That's it.
The other point I wanted to come back to, my concern is that whenever we pass an ordinance, there's a process we go through. There's a first reading, there's a second reading, there's public hearings, there's public input. This was just a plan that got adopted. There was no public hearing for this, other than public comment, which you all know my opinion on public comment. The public didn't have a right to have input on that if this was just a plan being adopted. And I have concerns about putting something in place which affects property owners' rights this way with a lower standard that we're meeting.
That's not, I don't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay.
There was public input called public comment sessions in the planning process that happened multiple times. Always the public was aware and informed to come to a particular place like a library, whatever, and give their comments about the plan. So there was an opportunity for the public to interact.
To that point, I would say I've been to public hearings like that in the past, and those that make it to the final plan are the ones that whoever's controlling the presentation want to make it to the final plan.
Well, I think
Too
that's a-
often, I've seen public input not carry through to the end.
I think it's a little insulting to our staff, Roy, because I think our
But it's
staff,
true.
our staff is not disingenuous. Our staff is responsible.
The Midi Cultural District Master Plan was one of them, where we had several things we asked specifically be taken out of the plan as a cultural district. And not only did it not get taken out, it got moved to another area. And if we didn't read the 150 pages again, we wouldn't know about it.
I'm sure that Joel can provide you the documentation of what was discussed at those public.
Mayor, you had a question?
Counselor, yeah. My understanding from the presentation, I understand the landowner's concerns, understand Mr. De Los Santos' concerns, and certainly Dr. Gowan's input as well. But from everything you presented, I'm clearly seeing that there's a process for this. There's an administrative process. The time for debate and all this is not now at the commission level. I understand, like I said, the landowner's issues, and if there's a concern here and something needs to be addressed, there's a process for that. Will it then, if it goes past P&Z, will it then come to the commission?
No, it would be final at that point. At that point, the applicant would have exhausted all of his administrative remedies, and at that point, if they wanted to pursue it, they could pursue it in a court of jurisdiction.
Okay.
I have a
Yes,
question.
Commissioner.
In the event that P&Z rules in favor of the developer, what happens to the master plan at that stage?
Well, it would be modified. It would have the impact of modifying the master plan.
We would start that process again for that part of the trail.
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question. Would we
We would have to.
go through adopting
Yes.
a modified? I think it would just be reflected as the decision by planning and zoning, because they've been given that authority through the UDC, that they've had that authority to, for lack of a better way of saying it, provide an exception to that master plan.
Last thought, Counselor. And to Dr. Gowan's point, and I agree that citizens should be able to move from point A to point B without having a car. I just question whether or not we as a city should be dictating to property owners. You have to give that access both at your front yard and now at your backyard as well.
Yes, and I think if I could maybe bring all the comments together is, I've asked staff to look at their records, and I'll let them chime in if I'm incorrect with my representation of their comments. But I believe this is, the reason why we're here before you is this is the first time I think that we have the culminating of all those different factors, that this trail impacts front-facing, Resaca fronting lot. I think it's the first lot that has experienced this along the Resaca, essentially cutting into their backyard. And so, to the point that, Mayor, you raised, is that there is an appeal process for that. And they can, and I shared with Mr. Arriaga's attorney, you can file that appeal, and if it's your argument that, hey, this 20 feet really cuts into lots A, B, and C disproportionately, they can make that appeal through this appeal process. So there is an administrative process in there already.
And once the administrative process is exhausted, then there is a legal avenue as well?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean.
If I may just add,
The
this is
landowner
Helen.
does have that ability if possible. And also, I think just hearing the comments, I think the city engineer or whoever's looking at this certainly has some input and some concerns that have been raised. I'd like for you to be involved in that process as well.
Absolutely.
I don't see it coming up that often because this is certainly a scenario that, I mean, I definitely get it. So I'd like, if possible, Victor, if you can be involved in any of this process. I'd
Absolutely,
appreciate it.
and also to show that if you want to look at the rest of this kind of, the way it flows along this Resaca, right? It's you have the state of Texas, which we won't have a problem getting access to their property. Then we own the next property over to it. Then we have this developer who's hasn't provided any proposed development. If he subdivides it, he'll be required to do the same. But we're looking at like 0.3 miles along this Solid Development, Inc.
I have
Mayor.
a comment.
I believe Helen has her hand raised.
Yes, I would like to add, there was a question regarding if this serves a public utility, and my understanding, Victor, is that PUB would be allowed an easement through these trails, so it would serve that purpose as well.
I couldn't hear.
I couldn't hear what she
That was
said.
Talking
difficulty.
about
She's
maybe
talking
having an
about three.
easement, an easement on this property as well or something.
Yeah.
Can you go
to-
back
To this
to the-
point right here, I think, what,
Picture of the aerial view. No, the next one. That one, okay. So, and Rick is here. If this developer decided that he wanted to provide an easement that did not face the Resaca, in other words, through the middle of the development, if they wanted to turn the trail, is that possible?
I would defer to the mobility department, but in traditional master planning for arterial roadways, those lines can move a half mile in each direction. So in thoroughfare planning, that's typically the practice across the state, but I would defer to mobility on how they would interpret that line.
So in
on
other
that
words,
map.
if they wanted to provide an easement so that the trail dipped into, let's say, the middle of the development and back up onto the Resaca frontage, is that something that either of you could explore with the developer?
Mayor, Commissioner, we would have to look at that. Based on the UDC, we have to follow the master plan. The master plan does not have alignment going north and south.
Okay,
But it's something
but you could explore.
we can explore that option. as well.
Okay. And then secondly, I would encourage in the meanwhile that the developer and Commissioner de los Santos visit Paseo de la Resaca, speak to Mr. Hudson and ask him what his property values are like and how the trail along the Resaca has influenced his development.
I believe having trails adds to property values overall. I just question whether putting it on somebody's property raises that parcel's value.
Well, it's worked for Paseo de la Resaca in your district.
All right.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
what I
know,
wanna
there's
do
a,
is-
I got a,
I want to avoid arguing any sort of particular,
Right.
specific case before the commission. It's not ripe for
beg your
us to be taking this up at this point. Commissioner, unless you have something
yeah.
global, then I'd say let's move on.
I think it's important for us to understand this isn't just taking 20 feet. When you buy a Resaca lot, you have access to certain feet into the water where he could grow. So this seems like it's actually taking about half of this property. So I mean, what Commissioner Gowan said, I think it is important for us to see if there's anything that could be done. I'm sure that they do raise values, but when you're on a Resaca, you want to have the water in your backyard. You don't want to have it on the other side of a trail. That's just a point.
I think you should look at the other option of whether the trail.
Yeah, and again, to the mayor's point, as I shared in the beginning, I think those are remedies or relief that whether the city engineer or the Planning and Zoning Commission could consider based on staff's recommendation.
Now, it
If-
is
if- if-
important
if they
for
should
us,
pursue that.
it is important for us, I mean, this is gonna come up in the future. I don't know how many more, so let's just make sure we look into it and we find something that can be done.
I think staff can maybe take inventory of, go along the different paths and see how many really abut to Resaca's. I have a suspicion that it's going to be very few, but I think we can provide that information.
And I think it's good to get out ahead of that now because that's probably going to come up as, if there's any other instances like this. I mean, I certainly understand. So I'd say the purpose of this, it's good information. I certainly understand the landowner's issue. So it's something for us to be aware of and look at and to try and get out ahead of in other instances. So I'd say look at it, see if there's any other instances like this. And if it needs to be modified for, for certain reasons, then bring it back. No plan's ever truly final, so go ahead and bring it back to us if that comes up. Make us aware of it so we can be out ahead of it. Okay, thanks.
Can I ask can I ask a couple of questions about how it would work? So if you put a sidewalk in the back of the property so that it fronts the Resaca, who would be responsible for covering the cost of the sidewalk? The developer or?
So
It would be a requirement
I
then?
didn't hear, it was kind of,
If you adopt the sidewalk master plan and you're requiring the developer to put in a sidewalk close to the Resaca, then the developer has to cover the cost of the Resaca, the sidewalk, correct?
I would defer to mobility about that.
Construction of the trail would have to be done by city at some point.
Okay.
Now, for sidewalks, we do require sidewalks as part of the development process in front of every lot, as well as now under the UDC, the perimeter around the subdivision, the developer must also install sidewalks on any street right away.
And what happens if someone wants, now I forget, is it a requirement or do the people have, property owners have the right to decide if they want to put a seawall? Or in a situation like this, if it was part of the sidewalk master plan, who would be responsible for deciding if I want to put a seawall or if I want to leave it naturally sloping or things like that? How do you standardize that?
Yeah, that's still up to the developer at the property owner.
Okay. So it would change them from property to property?
Sorry, I just stepped out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Consent agenda item 1.
This is consent agenda. Do we have any motions?
I'll move to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And Lori, I'm going to abstain on this. Thank you. Motion passes.
Items for individual consideration. Item 1, discussion and action to authorize a term sheet as solicited through request for qualifications, RFQ number FMN-56-0921, and request for proposals for the design and construction of a fiber network. City Manager's Office.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Elizabeth Walker in the Office of the City Manager, and I am accompanied this evening by Mr. Andres Caballo with CMG Consultants. His colleague Bill Marsh also joins us. They are the subject matter experts who have educated me on fiber architecture through this procurement process. Thank you for what it is you've taught me, and thank you for joining us here this evening. We are here this evening to discuss, as stated on the agenda, the fiber network, so-called broadband project.
Elizabeth, can you get closer? I don't know if there's an issue with the mic or something, but we're all having trouble hearing.
I can, and I'm soft-spoken, so I'll have to
It's
speak.
not just you. I mean, it was Victor as well.
And I think if you raise the podium, it would put the mic closer to your mouth.
That's as far as it goes up.
Oh, is
You
it?
have to speak right into it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Much better.
Should I introduce myself again? How about my colleague, Mr. Andres Caballo with CMG Consultants, and he is accompanied by Bill Marsh. And I introduced them by way of saying that they are the subject matter experts who have taught me through this process about fiber architecture. We're here this evening, of course, for the consideration of the fiber network, so-called broadband project. We'll do so by covering essentially 3 components in our discussion this evening. The project overview, the business model analysis that we learned and applied, and the various term sheet components that we considered. And we do so staying mission focused. This is actually authored by CMG Consultants, so they literally wrote the book on what it is that we are seeking to do here. But we do so because evidence suggests that broadband services have a net positive economic and social impact to communities by enhancing key functions, such as economic competitiveness, workforce development, training, educational capabilities, municipal operations, and smart city deployment. Simply put, we are here because of the potential to improve service to our constituents and enhance our ability to recruit development. We started this process nearly a year ago. We have used nearly every tool in the procurement toolkit, an RFI, a request for information, an RFQ, request for qualifications, as well as an RFP, request for proposals. And we used all those tools so that we could evaluate towards what is both the best qualified respondent, the best qualified vendor to build out this fiber network, in consideration too of the very best value business model in service to what it is Brownsville seeks to build here. To do that, we had to fundamentally design the network architecture, taking into consideration the City of Brownsville sites, PUB sites. PUB representatives were involved in the procurement committee in order to ensure that their critical needs were met through this process. Their critical needs, in particular, their AMI initiative. The various contractual relationships that we explored through this process may sound familiar to this commission. It was the build, transfer, operate model, the build, own, operate, a public-private partnership, and hybrids of the above. Getting to know each of the respondents, we honed in on their qualifications to get a sense through our due diligence of both their technical experience as well as their financial capacity.
If I may add real quick, in addition to understanding and exploring the many models used in Texas, we explore also models used in Santa Cruz County, California, Knoxville, Tennessee, Seminole County, Florida, Leesburg, Florida, Columbia County, Georgia, Palm Coast, Florida, Danville, Virginia, Provo, Utah, Santa Monica, California, Palo Alto, California, Lakeland, Florida, Fort Pierce, Florida, Hudson, Ohio, Bristol, Virginia, Morrison, Tennessee, Ashland, Oregon. And the lessons learned from all this is that clearly the cities that have invested in this capability are leaping ahead of others and closing the gap on the digital divide, which is truly something that is attacking the ability for communities at large to keep up with innovation in technology transformation. So many of the lessons learned can be simplified on the notion that cities should consider broadband networks as a long-term infrastructure program to improve all of the above charters of a city. Cities should gain strong local support from their stakeholders in the process. Cities should focus on the benefits of municipal broadband, primarily because of the notion that a city charter means delivering to every constituency and every stakeholder, not just those that can afford and pay for it. Cities should take measured steps to ensure that their strategies are well planned and executed. Municipal broadband initiatives generally require a careful balance of community benefit and financial sustainability to remain successful over the long term. We're talking tens of years, 30 years, 40 years beyond. Cities should focus on their strength when evaluating options for municipal broadband to find solutions that build on current competencies, meaning the city has certain capabilities and expertise, and it needs to partner with the right companies to deliver the right services at the right price to all stakeholders. So we came to you in January to ask permission to engage into a recommendation of seeking public-private partnership with all vendors. We received that recommendation from you all. And we also explained briefly that this model, while it is a high-level model on what this relationship would look like contractually, meaning revenues flowing from the top line to the city and franchise fees flowing to the city from every installation that happens in the model, that this model requires a unique partnership that perhaps hasn't been done before in Brownsville with the city and other vendors, but it is something that has been done across the nation multiple times, and it's state-of-the-art technology in terms of contract negotiations and policy design. So last but not least, we have gone through the entire journey with the respondents in developing a selection criteria on an in-depth interview and with all vendors one-on-one multiple times, in the development reference questions for all vendors and involved in the process, and the development of the public-private partnership framework to make sure that all the questions from all the vendors were also aligned with our requirements and our needs. We also, deploy a significant number of questionnaires to them and got information back. And as you look at the last elements, our goal was to accelerate this process of talking to multiple vendors and the back and forth of making sure that all the pieces and all the elements and the requirements and an understanding of the needs of the city were completely met and clear and transparent and above board. So here we are today in front of you presenting the findings of that in a recommendation.
And so in those interviews with multiple respondents and speaking to them about a public-private partnership as far as general terms, we meant to assert the duality of both the social purpose as well as the fiscal prudence. And the social purpose is the accessibility to the network. By following what would be through a public-private partnership, somewhat akin to a design-build model, we would preserve the ability through this construct to essentially build middle-mile fiber rings and then finish to the premise. And we could do so in concert together. So as we're building the middle-mile network, we could then be lighting up neighborhoods as we go. Affordability, through the city's investment, we could then guarantee discounted rates for qualifying households. And certainly, we could assert equity in the service delivery expectations. The fiscal prudence, as this would be a partnership, we have asserted revenue sharing. First and foremost, this is a social purpose. It is not expected necessarily to generate a profit, but we do expect to share in some of that profit through franchise and/or service fees, likely a combination of both. It's our intention to come before this commission in order to then allocate the revenue generated through this initiative to the Infrastructure Maintenance Fund. Remember, the infrastructure that we're building through this fiber system has a life expectancy of 50 to 100 years. And so our recommendation after several months in this procurement process is actually to authorize negotiations with 2 respondents, HMI Utilities with Lit Communities, for a combined proposal. 2 respondents with 1 proposal. We believe that this would best maximize the technical and financial capacity of the 2 respective firms. We've done our due diligence and found that they've actually had prior collaboration in other municipalities on similar type projects and initiatives. And we've also vested for investor commitment. The next steps, which would happen in parallel, so this is not 30 and then another 30 days, but for not to exceed, we estimate another 60 days, we would then memorialize the terms of the final negotiation through a shareholder agreement, incorporation as appropriate, purchase agreements with stakeholders, and other necessary documentation, including an EPC contract. This, of course, we would bring back to the City Commission for authorization and approval. Happy to entertain any questions.
I have a question. The end game here, I know what we're trying to accomplish is greater accessibility to broadband for our community. How many households that do not have access to what we consider an acceptable speed of broadband today will gain access to it as a result of these initiatives?
100%.
100% of citizens within the Brownsville city limits?
Yes, sir.
Have you seen our city limit map?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's 93 miles, Commissioner. So if I can kind of jump in on this, obviously I've been involved in this process from the beginning. So at this point in time, what we're delivering here, what we're hopefully approving today is the infrastructure, the entire fiber infrastructure, middle mile, and then partnering on the last mile, which is the fiber to the home, right? So at this point in time, we know that ISPs continue to talk about how there is accessibility to having internet. Obviously you want to get internet service, you can. What this is going to accomplish is 2 major things. One is accessibility, and second is affordability to high-speed fiber. So that's the speeds that are available now are just a fraction of what would be available through this network. So it's top-notch connectivity, top-notch fiber at a reduced cost to our citizens. So that's, I'm assuming why you said 100%, because everybody's going to have access to this on the 93 miles, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And just to clarify then, on this agreement, there would be a middle mile construction, right, which the city would contribute to that. And then we would partner with this entity to deliver the last mile services, and that's going to be at their cost.
That is correct, and actually, the city will own the middle mile, 100%.
Right. And the intent is then to license out the middle mile and create revenue from that as well.
That is correct.
And then obtain some sort of revenue from the connectivity on the last mile as well.
That is correct.
Okay.
And to ensure affordability, there will be a cap on what that other provider would be able to charge?
That is correct.
And that's really important.
It is very important, and it has been noted in the preliminary negotiations. And the proposed response, it is very important. Obviously, it's the crux of the consideration, is not just to deliver access, but then to make it affordable. The proposed respondent, as part of the early negotiations, has offered to guarantee the discounted rate even beyond the life expectancy of the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program. So should that federal program expire, the proposed respondent intends to honor that pricing.
Do we know what it costs in other cities that are doing similar programs? Just curious.
Couldn't hear the question.
What does it cost in other cities? And I think the answer to that really depends on the speed.
Yeah, it varies. It depends on the broadband capacity. So in some cities, depending on broadband capacity, like 25 megabits could be $10, $15. It's a subsidy, what you're applying to it. And there are different ways and creative ways of taking some funding that we may have jointly and put into a specific bank account to create that subsidy going forward. We're looking at delivering at a minimum 100 megabits symmetric uptime, upload, download for the minimum price point, and we're thinking that something around $30 on the cost of that. The subsidy could be zero depending on the programs, and so we're looking at, depending on what kind of customer you are and what customer type you are, you may be qualified to pay nothing.
I have a question. Can you go over again what Lit Community's role will be in this going forward?
Yeah, Lit Communities will be the operating partner for the running the network, and then they own an entity called BTX Fiber that will be the last mile provider of, an incumbent provider, and then there will be others that will be allowed to participate.
It is intended to be open network.
Intended to be what?
It is intended to be an open network, so there will be multiple ISP providers.
Competition's good.
What's the minimum speed you consider acceptable for what we're going to bring to residents?
100 megabits symmetrical.
Very good.
Up
Thank
and
you.
down. That's kind of where we want to be. And unfortunately, the national standard is much less than that, which I've had a big issue with because the administration's been talking about connectivity, but it's much less than 100, right? So we're doing a lot better than what the administration even expects.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
And just for comparison, what's the average resident getting here currently with the current service that's available?
About 25 megabits.
If you're lucky.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm rounding it up to be nice to the current providers. Don't want to kick anybody.
Any other questions? Or?
One last question. I hear you say all of Brownsville. This will go all the way up Military Highway, correct?
I believe so. It's going to go all the way to Boca Chica.
Yeah, I'm talking about the
You're on
other
the opposite side. I know.
Opposite side, down the river.
Yes, but
Okay.
it is 8 middle mile fiber rings to address the full geography of Brownsville and beyond its present city limits.
The way to think about the coverage is the key driver for the coverage was the BPUB water system and the electric system. And we are touching all of it.
Okay, we don't have PUB where I'm talking about. It's,
PUB doesn't cover the entire city.
I just want to make sure we are going all the way over there.
Yes.
Do we have anything visual that shows us where these rings are going to be built?
Yes, we do, but not with us right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, then, I would actually like the honor of making the motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agreement as proposed, I guess, with HMI and Lit Communities on this proposal.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Andres, thank you so much for your work. And I know we still have some negotiations to do, but look forward to seeing it.
My congratulations to you all. You just took Brownsville to the 21st century and then some.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, thanks.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege.
Motion to move to executive session?
Second.
We have a
Okay.
motion and a second. I think Lori needs to read it, though.
Yes, sir. I'll read the items. Executive session, item 1, closed session pursuant to section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code to deliberate the appointment, employment contract, and duties of the city auditor and discuss related legal issues with the city attorney under sections 551.071 of the Texas Government Code, City Attorney's Office, and Organizational Development and Human Resources Department. Item 2, closed session pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.072, discussion related to the possible valuation, exchange, acquisition, lease, or sale of real property, and discuss related legal issues with the city attorney under section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code, City Manager's Office.
Okay, we had a motion to move to executive session and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Recess to executive session.
Okay, it is now 6:17, and the city commission is going into executive session.
don't know who did it, but it didn't taste that good. It tasted more like bread. And I had one this morning. Because I wanted it.
Okay, we're
Okay,
back from executive session.
okay, we're reconvening into open session at 7:06 PM. And our next item is possible action on any items as discussed in executive session. Item 1, consideration and action, if any, related to the appointment, employment contract, and duties of the city auditor, Organizational Development and Human Resources Department.
Mayor and City Commissioners, based on discussion in executive session, I'd recommend a motion appointing Melida Pinales as city auditor and to authorize the city attorney to draft an employment contract with the terms as discussed in executive session. If this commission's desire to do so, I would entertain a motion to that effect.
I'll move to follow staff's recommendation or the attorney's recommendation.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
We have one nay.
I'm gonna
Commissioner De Los Santos?
abstain because I've never met her. I was out on medical leave.
Okay, we have one nay and one abstention. Motion passes. Thank you. That is all the items in executive session. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. We stand adjourned. Thank you. Y'all have a good night.
There being no further business to come before the city commission upon duly made motion, the meeting has adjourned at 7:07 PM.